Alright, in this video we're going to look at some examples in which we can apply the accent rules. So let's just begin. Let me just write down a word. So we'll have a word, die Neugen, and we'll determine where we can put the accents. So die Neugen. Those are your syllables. These are the last three syllables. So the antepenult is here, the penult is here, and the ultima is right over there. So you have your last three syllables. So first of all, you can only put accents on these last three syllables. Secondly, we have to look at the ultima. So is the ultima long or short? So in this case, the ultima is actually short. So the ultima is short, so that's the first place we look at. Second of all, is the penult short or long? So in this case, it's actually long. So if you remember that one rule that stated if you have a short ultima and a long penult, the penult, if accented at all, has to have a circumflex accent. So there you go. You have your circumflex accent. You can't put an acute accent here. That's impossible because of this rule. So that's one possibility. You can put a circumflex accent on this syllable. So let's write the word down again and let's see other possibilities for accents. Now you can also put an accent here. It's the antepenult, so that works. You can put an acute accent there. You can also put an accent here. So an acute accent here. And the final possibility, you can also put an accent here. So if you remember, you can put an acute on any of these three syllables. So those are all possibilities. So in this case, we put the acute accent on the antepenult, so that's there. We put it on the ultima, that's there, and we put the grave. So the grave can go on the last one. Now this would only be the case if we actually had a word that followed this word without any punctuation in between. But in this case, as we've seen before, you can't put an acute here because the penult is long. So diphthongs, those are long. So you can't put an acute there. So these are the possibilities. So 4 possibilities. So from this example, we can actually see that these accent rules, they don't tell us where we should put the accent. Instead, they only tell us where we can't put the accent. Memorizing the vocabulary will actually give us the standard forms. So that's the only way that we can know where these accents should go. It's all about memorization. Let's look at another word. So kaya mene. So in this case, let's break it up into syllables again. So kai and a. So you have your syllables here. So antepenult here, penult here, and ultima. In this case, we can see that the ultima is long. So it is long, the penult is short, has a short vowel. So if you remember that one rule, if you have a long ultima and a short penult, you can only have an acute accent here. So that's one possibility. Let's look at another possibility. So let's write the word out again. Now you can't put an acute here. Even though typically you can put an acute on any of these last 3 syllables, you can't put it here on the antepenult. The reason why that is so is because your ultima is long. If your ultima is long, as we mentioned in the previous rule, you can't put an acute accent there. Just impossible, it doesn't work. So here's another possibility. You can put an accent right over here, and a acute accent. Another possibility is actually a circumflex. Remember, circumflex can go on the last two, but it can't go on a short vowel. It can only go on a long vowel. So it can go here. And finally, our last possibility is actually the Grave accent. So you can put the Grave accent there as well. Now, an important rule to be aware of. So if you have a word, let's just say this word for instance, so hooray, I mean, so hooray. So a rule to keep in mind is that I and oi at the end are actually short. Even though they're diphthongs, doesn't matter. If they're at the end, they're short. If we were just to make up some imaginary word and put a consonant there, then it actually becomes long. Now it's long. So if it's closed in by some kind of consonant, it becomes long. But if it's out on the open, it's short. So that's one way that you can know if your ultima is short or long. First of all, by looking at whether or not it's a long vowel, and second of all, being aware of which kind of diphthong it is. So these two diphthongs, they're actually short if they're at the end. That's unless they're followed by some kind of consonant. So let's continue on. Let's look at certain words, certain accents, accented words, and let us see if they're correct. You have an acute accent right over here. So let's just break this up into syllables. D, da, men. So antepenal, penal, and ultima. So is this correct? It's not correct. It's not correct because the acute can only be on the antepenal, the penal, and the ultima. This is outside of the acceptable range. So this is not correct. Let's look at another word. So hooray. Let's say we have the acute here. Now is this acceptable? So the ultima is actually short, as we saw in the previous slide. So it's short because it's at the end, it's not followed by any consonant. The antepenal is long. So if you have a long penult and a short ultima, you can only have a circumflex accent here. So the acute accent is not correct. So once again, this is not correct. Let's do a few more. So prophetais. In this case, you have an accent here. So let's just split this up into syllables. Prophetais. So in this case, let's look at our syllables. So ultima. Is ultima short or long? It's actually long. You may say that this diphthong here is short. But you have to remember that if it's closed in, it becomes long. So any diphthongs are actually long, except for that one exception. So in this case, since your ultima is long, and you have an acute here, this is actually incorrect, because an acute cannot go further than the penult if your ultima is long. So that's another one of those rules that we went over. Let's look at another word. So doxe. In this case, you have your the acute accent there. So this is actually correct. If you have a long ultima, the acute accent can't be any further than the penult. In this case, you don't have an anti-penult syllable. It only goes to a penult. So in this case, it is acceptable. It's correct. Let's move on. Eremu, and it places the circumflex accent here. So in this case, you have a long ultima and you have a long penult. So in this case, it's actually correct. So correct. So the circumflex, it goes on long syllables, and this is a long syllable here, so that works. And let's just do a final example. So, Uranon. In this case, you have a circumflex accent here. So in this case, this is not correct because you have these syllables here, and this is actually the anti-penult. Now if you remember, circumflex can only go on the penult or the ultima, so it's outside of its range. So this is not correct. So those are just several examples, and these examples ultimately they show you where accents cannot be, not where accents can be. Once again, as I mentioned before, you just have to memorize your vocabulary to know what the standard positions are, where the accents are.